would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? The language that the gender cult, the LGBT gender cult, will catechize its prey. So people that it's preying upon. You're going through puberty and you feel kind of awkward in your body. It's because you're actually in the wrong body. You're trans, and you need to be able to do it. And if anybody tries to resist, if your parents say no, you're not, then they train, right? Would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? If you don't let me as a boy become a girl, if you don't put me on the hormone blockers, if you don't do this, then it's basically a hostage situation. They're appealing to the pity and natural affection of a parent for a child to say, if you don't affirm this, then your kid might kill himself.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Experience the Truth. Today is an exciting one because we have a special guest with us. His name is Dr. Joe Rigney, and we're going to be discussing his book that he just released as of March. Dr. Joe Rigney serves as the Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College and a pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He is the author of 8 books, including Leadership and Emotional Sabotage and The Sin of Empathy and Compassion and Its Counterfeits, which we will be talking about today. Dr. Joe Rigney, I'm excited to have you on with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Good to be here.
So Dr. Joe, what made you, give a little, I always tell our guests this, give a little teaser of why the listener needs to stay and listen to this. What was the reason you wrote this book? Can you give me a 60-second little preview of our conversation today?
Yeah, it's because I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so basically, over the last, so I was a pastor and professor in the Twin Cities, actually, for 15, 20 years. And while there, kind of over the last decade or so, had read some books on leadership, particularly a guy named Edwin Friedman, this rabbi, family systems therapist guy, that I had read and found helpful. And then began to notice that a particular concept of his, the danger and fallacy of empathy, was playing itself out on a widespread cultural scale, and in churches especially. And so I was watching as our entire society basically conspired to demonstrate one of the key elements of his books, which was the way that empathy was a tool of manipulation that sabotaged leaders. And so now I've written 2 books kind of tackling this in different ways, one more of a positive, one more of a diagnostic. This is the more diagnostic. But this idea that good things, a good thing like compassion, when it jumps the rails, when it gets untethered from reality and what's true and what's good, becomes really destructive. And it's really difficult to see because we know from the Bible that compassion's a good thing. That Christ commends it to us, models it for us. Be kind, be tenderhearted, weep with those who weep. All of these are biblical commands. And yet when it becomes untethered, it becomes really, really destructive, and it hides really, really well. And I think the last 10 or 15 years in the church have kind of demonstrated the destructive nature of some of these dynamics. And so I wanted to write, I've been working on this sort of project since probably 2017, 2018. And basically wanted to kind of show how do these dynamics work? Like how does it actually happen? What are the dangers involved? And then to commend the true alternative, compassion, biblical compassion, that actually does help people, that is oriented to their pain in the right way, but doesn't lose itself in the pain and suffering of other people.
Yeah, you talk about in your book how the comparison, because you can read this, and this is a real good. I'm into clickbait because that's what I do for my job, getting people to like, wait, what in the world, by making YouTube thumbnails. And so I think this is a great one because you look at it and you're like, the sin of empathy. How is that? And it's a little cloud holding onto a bomb. Like that's a pretty great attention grabber. But because it makes you think. And one of the things I like about how you compare compassion and empathy and what you just described, you gave an example of, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm butchering this, where you talk about the difference between compassion and empathy, untethered like empathy, is it'd be like someone drowning in like a river, and the person sees the person drowning and jumps into it without any regard or any exit plan, just wants to enter into their suffering. But then you talk about compassion, and the biblical way we should exercise compassion is roping ourselves off to a tree, grounding ourselves, and then going and rescuing the person.
That's good.
And I thought that is a great, example and illustration, not to be callous-hearted, because you also talk about that. You talk about apathy, where you just watch and you don't do anything. But how do we reach people and have compassion appropriately so we can get them out of the mess they're in? Like biblically, what does that look like? I love that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that is one of the more common, and some people get it. Some people refuse to get it. But everybody recognizes the danger of callousness and apathy. You have things like the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the two guys walk by on the other side of the road, see somebody in distress. And so we're primed and aware of the way that kind of response to pain and suffering is unfaithful. But what's harder to see is this improvement, which it's often billed as an improvement. And there are people who will say things like, sympathy's good. To be sympathetic is good, but to be empathetic, that's even better. And empathy was kind of billed and has been billed as a kind of improvement on compassion and sympathy, which takes it to another level. It's like compassion 2.0. Yeah. And when you start to examine what makes it better than this older term, so sympathy and compassion are synonyms. One comes from Greek, one comes from Latin, but they mean the same thing. What makes empathy better? And as you start to dial in what people think about that, a lot of them, it really is that total immersion. It's like, well, sympathy kind of maintains a little bit of distance because you're staying anchored to the shore. You're grabbing onto that branch. You're not going to be swept away along with them. And this is an old, universal human problem. When we're suffering, we don't want people to stay tethered. We want them to dive in with us and totally identify and affirm and validate everything that we say. And so the idea that they would be so arrogant as to stay tethered to reality, we find objectionable. And so we'll demand it. And what people have done is said, well, yeah, we should do that. We should absolutely dive in with both feet. And one of the surprising things is, when I define what does it mean to dive in with both feet, or what does it mean to be untethered, I mean, you detach from any notion of what is true, what is good, any notion of reality. There's you totally detach from that. And it's actually been surprising when I've talked about this, when people will all of a sudden come back and say, well, Jesus was a model for us of untethered empathy. And I just think we are reading a different Bible. Because the
love
idea
your
is
neighbor,
Jesus
Dr. Joe. You just love your neighbor. That's all we're supposed to do.
That's right.
As I define it.
And I just sit there and I go, no, Christ is a sympathetic high priest. That's the way the Bible describes him. He's moved with compassion, but he never is swept off his feet. He never loses control. And he always reserves the right not to blaspheme. He says that so he's sympathetic. He's tempted in every way like we are, but without sin. Like that but without sin piece is a big part of what I'm trying to get at, so that people don't get swept off their feet, because our emotions are really powerful. I think that's like underneath this is this idea that our passions, our emotions are really, really powerful. They have a tendency to sweep us off our feet. And that's true. And most people have a category for that when it comes to anger. And if you talked about sinful anger, people would go, if I wrote a book called The Sin of Anger, everybody would go, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, right.
And then if you said, well, wait, but you think that some anger is good, right? Like there's a good kind of anger too?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, good and bad anger. Okay, cool. What about fear? Is there good and bad fear? It's like, yeah, fear of God is good. Fear of man is bad. Oh, okay, good. Desire. Are there good kinds of desire and bad kinds of desire? Everybody goes, yeah. And then you say, okay, what about pity? What about compassion? What about empathy? Are there good and bad versions of those? And most people at that point they kind of get brought up short, and they go, well, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I want to say no, in the Bible, there's commands where God says there's times where he says, you shall not pity.
I was literally going to bring that up. I have that right here where he literally talk about that. And That's what I thought was interesting as far as scripture and biblical empathy, because that's something that I'm noticing like this year where I'm reading, I'm just like, oh man, that's heavy. Like the priests, or when Aaron's son, we were just talking about that yesterday, when Aaron's sons died because they improperly handled their priestly duties and they were killed. And he tells Aaron, you should not grieve them. And then in other places where people are mishandling or aren't treating God appropriately as he is holy, or they're committing sin, that the offenders are punished, but your eye shouldn't pity them. And I thought that's interesting you bring that up, as far as this book really is speaking truth and being more concerned ultimately with the fear of God rather than the fear of man. And that's where what you address is the empathy, concerned about the fear of man rather than the fear of God. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think the timing of the book is perfect. I know you started back in was it 17 you started writing it. I think the timing of it coming out is perfect, especially where we're at now. I think for a lot of people, they have felt like they have to either transform to the way the world is thinking, or they're viewed as being horrible people. And even the narrative of Christians. Last night, actually, I was watching something, and they were talking about the lifestyle of people when it applies to sports, and how certain individuals of one sex playing in another, and one of the people said, "Well, have you ever met somebody
a transformer?"
It was a transformer. Have you ever met one? As if to say, if you met them, you would change what you think, and you're wrong because you don't know them. It's all based on, like you're saying, it's not tethered to anything. I think it's a concept that isn't just true of sympathy. It's true of everything. You know, the whole thing, going into the water. Jesus went into the water, and I think everybody says because he went into the water, they're transformed. Have you had pushback from people? Like, has there been some resistance from people? Because people love to attack that type of thing. Have you experienced a lot of that?
Oh yeah. Yes. And of two different, I would put two different categories. One is, I think that, when it's been picked up and especially in recent months, because it's a wider cultural, it's bubbled into the wider cultural conversation. Yeah. So Elon Musk talks about suicidal empathy, and that the Western civilization's great weakness is empathy. And so, and he's not reading me, he's reading other people who are making a similar point. But because of that, mainstream news outlets pick it up, and they kind of lump all of this together, and it's all a part of far-right Christians trying to justify their hatred and cruelty and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of like worldly rejection of it. And I look at that, and I've budgeted for that in my head of, because what they mean by empathy is what I say empathy often means. So because that word itself is kind of contested, there's just a bajillion different definitions that people use, and researchers really struggle actually to define what they are even looking for when they study this idea of empathy. But because of that, some people, when they use the word empathy, they mean you must validate and affirm and celebrate every aspect of me. And so that's the world. What was a little more surprising initially, I knew that when I first started doing this, it would be provocative. People would turn their head, but I expected that explanation, like this is what I mean, this is what I don't mean, would get most people past that. And it's been kind of surprising. Now I'm less surprised, because it's just been a consistent thing, that a number of Christians that really, really have a deep, allegiance to the concept of empathy, and the idea that they really resist any notion of what I'm getting at. Or sometimes they will sort of reluctantly acknowledge, sometimes that might happen, but really, really hate the rhetoric of the sin of empathy. They don't like the provocative rhetoric at all, and they just can't get past that. So I've gotten lots of pushback from Christians along those lines, as well as when it comes to the way that some of the relations of manhood, womanhood, and how that kind of dovetails. There's a chapter on that people really.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
That one.
I could see how that steps on toes. I was just telling about the feminism queen of the woke. I'm like, woo! Yeah. Like you talk about that, and you put words behind. Like, I think what everybody's thinking, and I'm like, oh, now I feel like I have some verbiage to be able to like kind of define some of these things that we're seeing. You do it in such a great way, and that's what we were literally just talking about before you got on. That was one of my, I think, favorite chapters.
Actually, we did a series a couple of years ago called Haunted, and we got into occultish stuff, Satanism. And what I found in the research, secular research, not Christian research, secular research out of NBC, there was roots from feminism. So people were saying, well, you're just a bunch of white Christians saying that the reality is go to secular sites and you'll find that there's Satanism and the occult is literally rooted in principles and the occult and feminism. I mean, so
no, absolutely, because Satan, because they invert the fall, and so Satan giving Eve the fruit was actually a good thing, and she was the brave one who did the bold thing, and God, the patriarchy is bad, and Satan and the women are on the side, and like all of that stuff has deep roots in the feminist movement, and so you go, like we should not be dabbling in this. This is just bad.
Yeah, because it's always the oppressed is right, no matter if they are or not. It's those that have been oppressed or minority groups. It doesn't matter their position. We just cater towards them. And I think we've seen that with like feminism. And you talk about that with aspects. I'm trying to find the quote that I just highlighted. I read it for Pastor here, where you talk about how, here it is. I found it. This is so good right here. I wanted to read this. How you say the social virtues that are elevated, and this is a quote, I think, by someone else, Alistair Roberts, but it's in your book. The social virtues that are elevated in women's groups tend to be things like inclusion, supportiveness, empathy, care, and equality. And this is specifically related to a maternal instinct. The political landscape is being viewed through the lens of a hyper-concerned mother for her infant. And it infantilizes perceived victim, minority, or vulnerable groups, women, persons of color, LGBT persons, disabled persons, etc. And I'm like, wow, that is a statement right there. And you talk about that in your chapter, how it's not necessarily about right or wrong, but it's about making sure people feel seen, that they're advocated for, but it really kind of keeps truth like over here. That's not important.
That's absolutely right. And it is a, if you step back and you go, like, the phenomenon that I'm getting at is as old as dirt, right? I think Adam and Eve out of the garden were probably manipulating each other in this way. I'm pretty sure that Cain, the second story of the Bible is Cain sulking.
Yes.
And so human beings have always sought to manipulate those that care about them through their pit. Like that's a human problem. What's different today is the total embrace of that. So it's always been like, yeah, but you shouldn't do it. But people, it's like a lot of things, like it's sin, but you shouldn't do it, but people still do it.
Yeah.
Now it was, no, this is not actually wrong. This is actually the height of virtue. Like, this is what virtue means, is catering, accommodating, and coddling alleged victims. And then institutionalizing that at a society-wide scale, so that we ended up with what I affectionately refer to as the victimhood Olympics that we've all lived through over the last 10 years.
Good. It's a great
in which people compete, because basically the rules that got set up was the greatest victim wins. If you can be a victim, then you get to set the agenda for the entire institution, the entire society, the entire church. And so then people began to like go, okay, well then, which victim group was more oppressed, and then they had that intersectional hierarchy where you could just kind of check your boxes, and then work your way up, and we would reorient society around you.
Yeah,
and that's a lot of power for people to have, and yet it was all done under the banner of empathy, under the banner of compassion. We need to be compassionate and therefore reorient. And this is one of those things I learned in reading Edwin Friedman, was when empathy is elevated as that superior virtue, institutions get hijacked by the most immature and reactive members of them, because people are oriented to like, okay, this person is saying they're hurting. We now have to stop everything and focus on them. And now, what was the mission of this institution? That doesn't matter. We have to focus on this. And that's when you think about the various institutions, like you think about higher education, for example. I'm a professor. I work at a great Christian school, but lots of schools have diversity departments that are massively staffed and funded, and you go, is this an educational institution or is it a grievance mongering institution that's designed to coddle victimhood categories into people and leave them stuck? And that's basically what we've done as a society. And I want to stress one thing, though, is in the book is not called The Sin of Manipulation for a reason. Because I think the woke you will always have with you, the manipulative you will always have with you, right? I want people to not manipulate others. Yeah. But the bigger issue is, given that that's always going to be a human temptation, that sabotage and attempted to steer you by your empathy are always going to be there. How do you develop the kind of fortitude to recognize when that's being done and to resist it? So I'm putting the burden not on the victims, the alleged victims. I'm saying, let's just say that there are some. How do you sift and sort true ones from false ones, real ones from fake ones? Well, you have to have your compassion anchored to something and be able to get out of the intense, hot emotion of the moment, resisting the pressure of others to like just go along to get along. You have to be able to step out of that, get some air, breathe some of the Bible, and then be able to step in and sift and sort in a way that's faithful to the truth.
Well, and I think something that you're bringing up as I'm thinking about it, so many people want you to jump in and not be anchored to something, but you being anchored to something is the protection for you to have empathy and the hope for them to get out of the river. Without you being anchored, what hope and I think what you're saying is they don't want a hope of a better future. They just want more people in the water with them, in the current of the people. You want anchored people who are empathetic in your life, because that's the hope that you're not going to stay a victim long. But we've almost made being a victim the objective in life right now. Like you had said, who's the better victim? Who can be better at it?
Yeah. There's a picture that I got when you were saying that, because you talk about to the river, like if there's someone in the river and you're hooked to like the tree, but it's, we just want to jump in and I want more people in the water. I think of like how dumb would it be if the Coast Guard, those like pictures where it's a crazy storm and they like are roping down from the helicopter trying to to help the people that are drowning in the ocean. How stupid would it be if they just jumped in with no equipment and they're like, hey, how's it going? Oh, we're here now.
or if you were to get down there and the person's drowning and the person goes, I'm not grabbing your arm until you cut that rope. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah,
that's more of what's happening.
And the thing is that and this is how it actually happens. You got to cut that rope before I'll accept your help. And you go, I can't help you if I cut the rope. And then the actual pressure. And there's a chapter. This is the chapter on the progressive gaze in the book. Is you will actually have other helpers who will be pressuring you to cut the rope. Like, in other words, like it's not just the people who are hurting that are making the demand. It's other soft-hearted people who will try to put pressure on you to like just go along. And it's actually pressure from them that is really, really difficult to resist because they're not the hurting one. Yeah. They're the advocate for the hurting one. They're the nice, soft-hearted people who go, but don't you just think in this one instance it would be okay if you didn't insist on this or that? And that's the cut the rope. And it's really difficult when you have victims, real or alleged, and then advocates for those victims, and then soft-hearted people. Those three groups all pushing in the same direction, and you go, that's how churches got steered over the last decade in a whole host of issues because progressives discovered this was a very effective steering wheel on the back of Christians.
Can you talk about, I'm trying to remember, but you talk about the different ages within how the church is operated within culture. It's like, what was it, 1924 to 19. I can't remember, but as it applies to how the church has tried to be relevant, can you talk about those ages and how progressivism has creeped into the church and steered?
Yeah, so there's an author named Aaron Renn who wrote a book called Life in Negative World. And he kind of sets up this framework of positive world was like, mid 20th century up through like 1994. And what he means by that is that wider culture has a largely positive relationship with Christianity. Like being a good church, to be a good person is to be a good church going man. And biblical people might disobey biblical morality, but they acknowledged it. Right. So if you committed adultery, you had adultery, but people thought it was bad.
Yeah.
So that's positive world. Neutral world ran roughly from like the mid 90s to 2014. And it was when like there was kind of this pluralistic public square idea where Christianity still had a little bit of residual impact, but it was not the dominant theme. If you were a Christian, you're kind of weird. But yeah, you can, I guess, be at the table. And then negative worlds, 2014 to now, in which if you're a faithful Christian, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
It's not just that you're weird, you're a bad person because you're a bigot and you're a hater and you won't go along with all this stuff. So that's Renn's framework of like, that's how America has secularized over the last, 70 years. The reason the way that dovetailed with my book was to recognize that there's different ministry strategies in those different eras. So you think about the positive world, it was like revivalism, or culture war, like the country's going the wrong way and we're going to fight and the moral majority is going to take back. And there's a cultural strategy. In that neutral world, there was this pivot where people stopped talking about culture war and instead talked around engage the engagement, engage the culture. And they would differentiate from those culture warriors. We're not like those Christians. And they wanted to win a seat at the pluralistic table. And they wanted to think in terms of like who, the world is watching and we need to show the world that we care. And so we need to show the world that they care. And then the world became defined very narrowly. It was the world meant secular, progressive, urban elites. Like that was when people said the world is watching, it was people in New York City. It was secular progressives. That was the world. Because if you just said, oh, so the world's watching, you mean that guy, the coal miner in the red hat, he's watching and we should make sure that we're trying to persuade him of the good news of the gospel. Is that what you meant by the world? No, they didn't. Nobody meant that. Everybody meant the secular progressives. And what that meant is that secular progressive concerns, sensitivities, orientations, things like that, came to kind of dominate. And so the way I describe it is it was like a lot of pastors, I think a good example, a lot of pastors came to have a little progressive sitting on their shoulder, kind of evaluating everything that they did. So every sermon, it's like, if I say that here's a true thing in the Bible, but I need to soften it because there's this little progressive on my shoulder that's going to say, if you say that, I am not going to be happy with you. That's not very loving. That is not very empathetic. Yeah. And so they would pare down the rough edges in order to accommodate the world. And as a result, then when we pivoted into negative world, it was like we'd adopted all of this kind of progressive categories, and then they just began to use it as a steering wheel. And so if you said, gay marriage, we're not doing that. We have to resist this. That's not marriage. That's not a real marriage. It doesn't even exist. Well, you're being cruel. You're being unkind. You're being unempathetic. Well, what if you won't use the pronouns? You're being cruel. If you're being unkind, if you won't open the border and allow an invasion of your country, if you want to have a border, you're not being empathetic. This is a funny one. Somebody sent me a picture a couple weeks ago after the book came out, and it was they were in Mexico and they were looking at the Mexico side of the border wall, and in big graffiti block letters across the border wall at this one spot was written the word empathy. And I just thought, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that like the person who wrote that is saying that this border wall is an offense against empathy. So having a border, having boundaries, having anchors, having anything like that is a front to this idea of empathy. Empathy means tear down the wall. Empathy means you're not allowed to have boundaries. That's what empathy means for a lot of people. Now, of course, some people just mean, no, I think empathy just means being nice. And I'm like, okay, I'm not talking to you. If you just think Christian kindness, okay, fine. That's how you want to define it. I'm not going to fight with you about the words. But for a lot of people in our culture, it does mean no boundaries.
What I think is, I keep having these, as you're talking, all these random like pictures are coming into my head. One of them being, I'm just thinking of when I started a new job. There were some times where we had to like watch videos, like the really corny, cheesy employee handbook type videos. When you talk about like empathy, as far as like, you can't have this border, you can't have rules if you want to be empathetic. I think of that what you talk about in the book is it's weaponizing pity, right? And you're manipulating me as in terms of this employee handbook videos that you would commonly see, like the guy's working at a retail store and his friends come in and he goes, he's starting to put stuff in his bag, and then you stop him, and it's like this really cheesy, like, what? You're supposed to be my friend. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, don't you want to come to the party on Saturday? Like, well, I'm not going to invite you if you don't let me. And it's something like this really corny social situation, but it's really what that is. It's like you are taking our relationship and you're making it as if I'm the bad guy, and you're putting me in a weird spot because I embrace the rules, or I'm tethered to reality to not hold you accountable of you breaking the rules. Is that in a sense kind of
right?
Yeah, that's like the picture I got.
It does get at that idea of like, so there is. So I had a reviewer, I think at one point read the book and really played up the element of like fear of man as a major driver, because it's not just that we want. So for Christians, it's not we want to be compassionate, but we also want to be known as compassionate. Like we want that to be our reputation. And so oftentimes the way that the steering happens is, if you don't go along with what we want to do, then we'll call you callous and heartless.
Yeah.
And you don't want that reputation, do you? And so they hold your reputation over your head as the kind of threat. You won't be a good Christian. And then therefore the definition of good Christian has now been defined by the people who are weaponizing your compassion in order to get you to mute yourself on issues of biblical faithfulness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Back to what you were saying, we can get maybe into the church hurt concept a little bit here too. Yeah. As a pastor, I went through that period of time where you were talking about, you have that little progressive on your shoulder. There is that pressure, and that pressure is really powerful when your objective is to be successful in ministry. And and the objective is no longer about spirit and truth. It's more about the influence I have, and wanting influence with people, wanting to be known as an influential leader in a community or among my peers. And the way you do that is butts in seats. How many people do? So you often go against, or you convince yourself that you have to, because they I had someone say to me one time during this period, and I think Alex would agree, I'm not really influenced by that kind of stuff.
Pretty upfront. He offends people frequently. No, I was joking, but he's very direct. It can be misconstrued.
This is what it says. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but I'm not given permission to tell you what you want to hear, essentially. But there were people who came up and said, well, we can't invite our friends here because they would be offended by what you have to say. And I said, first of all, it's not what I have to say. It's what the Word of God says. So essentially you're saying what you believe. If you believe what I'm saying is true or not true, that's a problem with you and him. That's not a problem with me. And yet people assign it more to another individual. Like, I got a problem with what you said. They're not distinguishing. So there's a lot of pressure on spiritual leaders to adapt to the changing climate that I thought was pretty amazing when you shared that. I'd never heard that before. And I think it just brings a lot of clarity to what was happening during that decade. I was going to say that this last decade has been transformational in our culture with that.
Yeah. Well, and even with what you're saying there, what people will do is they'll say, well, yeah, I know it's what the Bible says. But it's the way that you're saying it. And they'll make it about your tone, right? Yeah. And you go, okay. And if you're a pastor and you go, I want to have a good tone, I want to have a kind tone. And you're like, well, you want to be kind.
Yeah.
But oftentimes what people react against is the clarity.
Yeah.
And so people mistake, I've thought about writing another, it wouldn't be a full book probably, but the same thing, the sin of nuance. Because oftentimes what nuance is it's a way of burying the truth under acres of qualifications.
Yeah.
So it's like, rather than just say like, here's what the Bible says, it's like, here's what the Bible says, but it doesn't mean, and you just start trying to like massage it. And it's always selective. I think that's the other element that maybe is worth bringing out is one of the things that when empathy is raging, when it's intense, it becomes highly selective. And so this is one of the things that people get surprised about. I had somebody push back on me the other day about, basically imagine thinking the problem is too much compassion as opposed to too much cruelty in our culture. And I say, actually, those go together because it's empathy, because when it gets intense, it's empathy for one group of people is coupled with hostility, hatred, and even justification for cruelty against their enemies. Ooh. So if you go, I have high empathy for this group, it means anybody opposed to them means I can feel free to like hate them, be angry at them, be cruel towards them.
Yeah.
And this is something I learned from Lewis talks this way. He says, even a good emotion like pity, when it's not connected to the moral law and to justice, leads through a very natural process through anger to cruelty.
Yeah.
And he actually says it's pity for the oppressed classes. So he's thinking of like 20th century socialism, Marxism, that kind of thing, communism. And we have just a cultural version of that with kind of the cultural Marxism. Pity for the oppressed classes often leads to anger and hatred toward the oppressors. And so pity and social scientists actually, this was something that surprised them because they saw all of this raging tribalism and cultural polarization, and everybody's at each other's throats over the last decade. And they thought, hey, we need some more empathy. And then when they actually went to research it, they figured out that it was actually the people who self-described and evidenced the most empathy were actually the most tribal.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was empathy for my tribe means I hate your tribe. Yeah. And there's a quote that I picked up. A guy wrote a book back in 2016, secular guy, a book called Against Empathy, named Paul Bloom. So it's a secular book. But I remember a quote I read in an interview he did where he said, when most people hear the word empathy, they think of kindness. I think of war. So he said what he meant was, if you look at the Middle East as just this big train wreck. And he goes, yeah, it's just too much empathy.
Wow.
And you go, and when you actually go like, what he means is empathy for Israelis means you can justify cruelty towards Palestinians. Empathy for Palestinians means you can justify cruelty towards Israelis. Like, it's like, that's the dynamic because our passions are out of control. Ooh. They're not governed and tethered by reality. And so so empathy here, anger there. It's still passion. And it's still in the driver's seat.
I have I had a quote here ready to bring up for you because I thought this was interesting. And literally, we have talked about this because on our podcast, we do a lot of reactions to cultures and give a biblical perspective. Really, literally, our podcast is helping people. Now you've given us the words to describe what we try to do is bring people back to reality or try to like tether. We have ourselves to the tree and we're trying to go out and be like, okay, bring it back. Let me help you.
It's confronting TikTok theology half the time.
That's what we do. We confront that. But one of the things that got me beyond mad, regardless of my feeling of what's going on in the Middle East, what happened with Israel or Hamas and Palestine, we had actually just went over there shortly before these attacks happened. And we understand, I think going over there and getting to talk to a Palestinian, we realize it's a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. And so when this attack happened, regardless of my position or whatever, I was infuriated to see people like influencers with tons of like credibility and influence were speaking on the situation, not condemning the actions. And I'm like, regardless of how you feel, you are saying the R word and abuse and killing of innocent people was justified because the Israelis had it coming. What you were just saying, there is no empathy, there is no pity for or you can't condemn the actions of what took place because they were of the oppressed people. And I'm like, that's the equivalent. I had told this in the video, and this actually got a lot of people like annoyed or upset, and I was labeled like the bigot or like the Zionist, because I'm like, that logic is like the kid at school that gets bullied, and then he brings a gun the next day, and we can't condemn his actions because they had it coming. And you have a quote here in the book where it talks about this mentality. The end game is well expressed by a spokesman for Hamas. After their brutal attack on Israeli citizens on October 7, 2024, they say, "We are the victims. Therefore, nobody should blame us for these things we do. Everything we do is justified." So there's truth. It's like it comes off like the things you say can, if people aren't listening, they can just take it and be offended. But there is truth anchored, like definitely, of what's happening in our culture and what we're seeing currently right now. It's so good.
And that argument could have been used on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
You could have said that, you know, the Israelis, just like you said, both sides could have made that exact same statement.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the issue there is not then that you go, well, throw up our hands, everybody's right or nobody's right. It's that you actually have to do, there's a lot of work to be done to determine, you know, what was good and what was evil. Like, so it's possible for you to say, hey, there's issues here in terms of the systems and structures and whatever in that conflict, and still say, but burning kids alive is still evil. Like it doesn't matter. Like that doesn't matter. Like that's still evil. Yeah. And if you can't bring yourself to say it, because that would, it's just team sports. It's just tribalism, and it's driven by, I think, untethered, excessive empathy.
Yeah. Well, and you got the United Healthcare CEO gets shot, and then the empathy that was shown online for the shooter of the man saying it's okay to murder him. I even watched something during the whole thing with Elon Musk. They were interviewing on live television somebody who said, so you're saying that because you don't agree with what Musk is doing in Washington, it's perfectly okay to destroy people's property and, you know, light things on fire and throw rocks at their car as they're driving by. And she says, as long as we don't kill people, it's totally okay to destroy people's property because we don't agree with what the founder of the company is doing. And it is like you lose. I think what you're saying, and you say somewhere in the book, when you have empathy, logic doesn't have a place anymore. It doesn't. Logic just doesn't exist.
100%.
Can we go to the church hurt part? Just quickly,
you talk about you talk about that, how, and we've lightly touched on it, on how the victim or the alleged victim, whether that be they were just confronted and they're held accountable, and because they were hurt based on how it was perceived, they get to dictate and steer what happens. You talk about how the church has been kind of influenced that, and almost leaders have been bullied to take the position of really what you said before, like the immature. I'm trying to find, do you know what, is that life under the progressive gaze?
I think it's in the progressive gaze. Yeah. And the idea there was that if maybe part of the issue is, so you have real evils, right? So you have people who have, been abused.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Of course. And so that's a real thing. But then what happened was that term abuse got enlarged and expanded. So and this is actually a phenomenon they studied. It's called language inflation or concept creep. And you think about it, it's like, well, the word abuse is super loaded, and at one time had a very particular meaning. It meant something like physical or sexual violence. Like to be abused was to be, you were a victim of physical or sexual violence. But then it kind of got enlarged, and all of a sudden you have categories called emotional abuse or psychological abuse or spiritual abuse. And then it's a lot more nebulous. What does that mean? And frequently then the gauge was simply whether someone felt hurt. If they felt hurt, then they were the victim of spiritual or emotional or sexual or psychological abuse. And what that meant was, if you're a pastor and you say, hey, you can't sin that way, you confront someone about their sin and they get offended and hurt, then they could say, well, you were being spiritually abusive. And I remember being a pastor and a part of a situation, it was at a sister church, in which an elder was accused of being disqualified from ministry for bursts of anger and outrage, or fits of anger. He's a pattern of fits of anger. and this was and therefore abusive. And the rest of the elders were like, "Oh no, well, give us examples." And the accuser then said, "Well, you remember that church meeting a few months ago?" "Well, yeah, at that meeting when he stood up at the microphone and disagreed with that person." It was fits of anger. And it was just like it was all of a sudden, it brought everybody up short because everybody was super concerned about, fits of anger, until the actual example. And they were like, we were all in the room. All he did is get up at the microphone and say, "I disagree with what they said, and I think it should go this way." And it was like sober-minded and calm and cool as the day was long, but direct, very clear, direct speech.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was then repeated back as an outburst of anger. And so that's an example of the way that like language became inflated and the concept of abuse crept over to encompass more and more phenomenon, which meant then once that term was on the table, you started accusing, you're abusing, or you're enabling abuse. This person's the abuser and you're enabling them. It just froze a lot of pastors because they went like that. And I think even to this point today, there's a lot of bad names that people can call you, and certain ones have been overused to the point that people just dispense with it. So it's like if you're like today or during the height of kind of wokeness, if you were someone who believed that you should judge people based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin, people started to call you a racist. Right? It's like I think we should judge people based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And they went, "You're such a racist."
Yeah.
And so that term basically got so inflated and distorted that people just kind of shrug it off now. It's like, if you're faithful and if you're just a good Christian, you're probably going to get accused of being a racist. If you believe that men are the head of their home, you're just going to be called a misogynist. Yeah. And so you've gotten some terms kind of just roll off your back.
Yeah.
I think the term abuser or abuse enabler still has a lot of power. And so people flinch. And part of the dynamics that we're talking about is the way that they want you to flinch, because if you flinch, they've got you. They want you to, and that doesn't mean that if someone says something, you shouldn't check. So, they call you a name. They say you're enabling abuse. Oh, I should check. And then once you determine, no, I'm not. I'm just speaking clearly, and I'm keeping my head and being sober-minded, and I'm resisting the manipulation of different groups. Okay, so then now just know they're going to call you it, and you just have to go, rejoice when they call you things falsely. That's what Jesus said to do.
Yeah. I think of my wife wouldn't care if I shared this. It's a funny story we bring up, but hopefully not Bailey. But like when you say that, I'm thinking there was one time she left a candle on, and we had like left, and I came back and I'm like, "You left the candle on?" And I didn't say anything to her. I was just like, "Bailey, like, why would you leave that on?" And I made it this big deal. And she goes, "Why is this like such a big deal? It was just a candle." And I'm thinking, worst case scenario, what if my cat tipped it over and the house got set on fire and all these different things? And I'm walking it down. And then later she told me she wasn't happy about the situation, or I confronted her and I like freaked out. And she goes, I'm like, "Were you bothered because I confronted you on that?" Like, as I could tell, she was annoyed at me. And she goes, "Yeah, like you called me an idiot." And I'm like, "I didn't call you an idiot." I'm like, "When have I ever called you an idiot?" And she goes, "I guess you didn't, but it felt like it. And we came down to it." She's like, "Well, I guess I perceived it that way. You didn't call me that way. You didn't call me that, but I felt like that, how you were talking to me." And I feel like when you talk about the pastor coming up to the mic, it's what was perceived or what was felt, but it wasn't really the reality. I say that because we laugh about it now. We joke about that, and we'll bring it up in conversation. But that's really the case. Yeah.
So this gets at two good categories. So there's an issue of there's reality, and then there's felt reality.
Yeah.
There's reality and there's felt reality. I learned this from a counselor friend of mine who was really good, and so he said, so felt reality is a real thing, like it's on the table. But felt reality is not the same as reality.
Yeah.
And part of what happens in the grip of untethered empathy is that felt reality becomes reality. You can't disagree with it. If someone feels it to be true, if I perceive it this way, then that's enough to convict, as opposed to being. And so this is where I think I've got a quote in there from John Piper, who said basically, talked about emotional blackmail and
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
that someone will say, I don't feel loved, and therefore you're not loving. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Someone can genuinely love and the beloved not feel
Right.
loved,
Right.
right? And you can't let their feelings be sovereign, be judge, jury, and executioner in that scenario. There has to be some standard that you can actually measure felt reality against. You have to measure felt reality by reality.
Mm-hmm.
But in the grip of these emotions, that just goes out the window entirely.
And it's funny because I don't know if you're up with the. I'm only 26, so I'm up with the slang. I'm getting off the path, but there's slang for people like this, or guys that pursue girls, and it's not received back, but they'll drop everything and they'll throw themselves, they'll do whatever, and they're almost kind of manipulated by the girl in order to get things out of them. We call them simps. That they are not getting, a girl is getting attention, or she's getting things, but there really is no interest there, and they don't really recognize that. They're called simps. Yeah, stringing you along. It's funny. It's a similar kind of comparison there, where it's almost like manipulation. Like, you don't love me, and then you're manipulating them to get things out of them. It's emotional blackmounts.
Well, and I think in a lot of ways, even in Christian circles, leaders and marriage counseling or in a marriage is often infers, well, the man is wrong, the woman is always right. And you'll even hear that. And the perceived reality, even if you bring up that's a perceived reality, you're almost viewed as, like you said, misogynistic, or that the male, like it's so prevalent in our culture, in the church. It's been influenced. The church hasn't been an anchor to culture. Culture has kind of pulled along the church into that mindset. And it's communicated online through social media at a greater pace than it has ever been in the past.
You talk about in Progressive Gaze, you give this example of how I'm trying to remember it, so I'm asking you. I couldn't find the quote in there. I didn't have it highlighted, but I really liked the perspective of how you might not necessarily be compromising or entering into this, but it doesn't mean you still could end up being affected by it, because it's just the culture we live in. And you talk about it, how it's like drinking from a stream. You're getting water from a stream, and it's like down the road or whatever, there's pollution going on, and you're drinking from that same stream that's been corrupted by people. Does this ring it a bell? I'm trying to remember the way you put it.
It's a friend of mine who basically said that, if you're drinking water downstream, you may have no idea that the water's been polluted, but it doesn't mean you won't get poisoned.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Right. So you may not know where the influence is coming from, or even necessarily perceive it, but you're still getting poisoned. And so there's a way in which these sort of things did kind of creep into the church. They often crept in through counseling ministries and women's ministries in particular. I think were two ways, because and this was the thing, right? Women are the more empathetic sex. And by God's design, this is a good thing. This is why they excel at nurturing, caring, that maternal instinct, to move towards people who are hurting and suffering, and to care and welcome and include. That's a design feature for women, but it needs to be kept in its proper place. And so as that kind of warmth and welcome, that's great. But if the task assigned is a guardianship task, right? Set the perimeter and defend it. Then at that moment, if it's set the perimeter and defend it, then compassion and empathy can be liabilities. And so I think this is one of the reasons why the scriptures restrict the pastoral office, the ministerial office, to qualified men, because God has designed men to be able to do this kind of guardianship role in a way that he hasn't designed women. They have a different calling and task and function as mothers, to be warm and welcoming. And so if you do that, if you flip it, and then all of a sudden you allow female pastors, there's a reason when we track the history of American denominations over the last 70 years, how quickly it went from, well, we're going to ordain women, to we're going to sanction sodomy, and we're going to bless same-sex unions, and we're going to have gay clergy, and we're going to we have to fly the trans flag. That progression is a very natural one, because at each step, what's happening is those churches are being driven and governed by excessive empathy and compassion. by untethered empathy and compassion. And so as a result, you can lose the whole thing simply because it's what cancer does when it's left untreated.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, there is. You also talk about, and we've covered this, but I found the quote specifically that I really liked as far as how the progressive gaze is really this empathy is really just people pleasing and standing for truth, rather having the fear of man over the fear of God. And Paul says you can't be a servant of God if you fear man. It's impossible to mix the two. You say what we call the gaze, Gaze, the biblical,
there's a pun.
Yeah. The Bible calls simply fear of man or people pleasing. The progressive gaze is fueled by passions, untethered empathy, the fear of man, and the desire for approval and respectability. I think that's the case, and Pastor talked about it. It's wanting to be successful as in the flesh, butts and seats, rather than standing and speaking truth, more concerned about the fear of God rather than people leaving your congregation when you stand for it.
Yeah, well, and I can't remember if I put it quite this way in the book. I know I used the example. If we're talking about, if we define empathy as the untethered kind, so let's just do that. Who's the most empathetic leader in the Bible? And it's Aaron at the golden calf.
Ooh,
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah,
and when you think about it, you go, wait, what? Aaron, empathy? It's like, yeah. So here you have this distressed and traumatized people who've been put through the ringer. They were slaves for hundreds of years. They got brought out with like plague. Everybody, they had to put blood on their doors so their kids didn't die.
Yeah.
Then they go, they're chased and, through the wilderness to the edge of the Red Sea with like an army about to come and slaughter them. And then God opens the waters and they pass through, and then they watch an entire army get drowned. They get harassed by the Amalekites all through the wilderness. They come to a mountain. There's fire at the top of it. Like, these people have been through a lot. You know what I mean? Like, if anybody could say like, hey, I think we're traumatized.
Yeah.
I think this could say we're traumatized.
No kidding.
But then Moses is up on the mountain, and he's been God's dude. He's been like, his arms are up, they win. His staff can like bring water out of a rock. Like, this has been God's man, and he's gone. We don't know what happened to him. And so they come to Aaron and they're scared. And they're like, hey, make us gods who go before us. Like, we need somebody to protect us and make us feel safe, because we don't feel safe. And Aaron, and you think about like the actual, like, what would the dynamics have been? And it's like, here's an agitated, anxious, scared people who have been through the ringer, and Aaron finds their angst and fear intolerable, and he gives in. Ooh. And he says, okay, I'll do it. I'll do the one thing that God said don't to do. I'll make you give me your gold. He forges an idol and then says, now they feel better. They feel safer. They're having a nice party. They start to commit sexual immorality like the Egyptians did. And so it's like, well, and he tries to kind of baptize it. He's like, we'll have a feast to Yahweh tomorrow with this calf. And so he tries to kind of blend it and cover it over. But it's like, I sit there and I go, yeah, that's his empathy got the best of him. And it led to cowardice. It led to abdication. It led to idolatry. All of that's in play. And so he's empathetic. On the flip side, you want to know a good example of like the opposite. It's Job, when his wife, they've been through the ringer.
Yeah,
they've had the worst suffering imaginable. 10 kids killed in a day, losing all of your stuff. Your entire household has been decimated by natural, quote unquote, natural disasters and theft and everything else. And then his wife's just lost her 10 children, and comes to him, and he's sitting there with, sores on his body, and he's worshiping God. And she goes, are you still holding fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Like, she's just like, and if you think about that pastorally, you're like, she's hurt.
Yeah.
She's like, she's been through unimaginable suffering, and out of that pain, she is speaking in anger at God.
Yeah.
And it would be, and so imagine that you're Job's pastor, and he comes to you and he says, well, I was talking to my wife last night, and she told me again, curse God and die. And, she's sad. Like, and imagine the pastor being like, you may not. Like, you need to go tell her she's wrong. Right? Like go, and Job doesn't even need a pastor. He just says, you're speaking like a foolish woman. You are saying lies right now about my God. You are saying lies. Shall we receive good from the Lord, not evil? Like, Lord gives, Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I am not going to curse God simply because you're hurt.
So good.
And it's like, and just like that, the kind of fortitude necessary. It's not, and you go like, well, that doesn't sound very compassionate. And you go like, no, it actually is.
Yeah.
Because the only source of hope available to her in that moment is the goodness of God.
Yeah.
And she is saying, I am refusing the goodness of God because I'm angry at him. And Job is trying to puncture that and saying, don't speak foolishly. Don't close yourself off from the grace and mercy of God. He's still good. I don't understand why this has happened either. I have questions.
Yeah.
But like, I am not going to curse God. Like, so true compassion always reserves the right not to blaspheme, not to commit idolatry, like Aaron did. And so that's hard. And I mean, maybe to bring us down a little bit even more, I have a friend here who talks about one time he was at a bachelor party. And they were, you go around the bachelor party and everybody's giving advice to the groom. Mm-hmm. And the girl's father is there. So the father-in-law is there. And he's been married for a long time. And so he says, I'm going to give you some advice. In marriage, you're going to have conflict. It's going to happen. And there's going to be times where you're in a fight with your wife and you're not going to think that you did anything wrong. And in that moment, I just think you need to value the relationship more than being right. And you should apologize even if you don't think you were wrong because you value the relationship. So this is his advice. And then my friend gets to go next, and he goes, so there's going to be times in marriage you're going to be in conflict, and sometimes you're going to be wrong. And when you're wrong, you should absolutely, quickly, sincerely keep short accounts and apologize. But there's going to be times when you're in conflict with your wife, and she's going to think you're wrong, and you're not. And in those circumstances, you may absolutely never apologize to your wife. Never. Because it's a sin to lie to your wife. And if you just think of, like, I remember the first time he told that story, and I remember flinching. I remember going like, "Oh my goodness, oh no!" And it's like, what is that? And it's like, why would I want to lie to my wife?
Yeah.
But because it's like we want to give in, and we can justify it in the name of for the sake of the relationship, but we're willing to lie, right? We're willing to coddle and not resist because
it's like it's like who the most loving. Most times I get. When I'm online, I do a lot of live streams and I talk to people and I have a prompt. It's like, why aren't you a Christian? I've had other things, and we get tons of people that'll come on from different backgrounds. And most of the progressives will say, there's no hate like Christian love. And I counter and I'm like, actually, I believe, and this is one that has been one of the most popular prompts because it's a little bit of rage bait, but it's true. And we've talked about this, how Christians are the most loving group of people on this planet, like prove me wrong. And I believe that Christians are the most inclusive, loving people on this planet, prove me wrong. And of course, you know who's mad at me about that. The people that think Christianity is bigoted, hateful, or whatever. And then so I lead them down the road, and it gives me an opportunity to tell them the gospel. And I walk them down, and I talk about the love of God for the enemies, my role if I'm a true follower of Christ. I am not reserved. I don't have the rights and privileges you do, being that you disagree with me and you can hate me. You disagree with me. I'm actually called to pray for you and bless you. Like, I'm going to disagree with you, but my love, I don't have the right to hate you or reserve my love unlike you do. So you claim inclusivity, but you're not. You have the same ideology as Hitler, that those that were opposed to him, you'd silence them. As some tyrant that you think God is, you exercise that same right, that those that disagree with you, but you claim love and inclusivity. It's the lie of our culture, but there is no comparison to the love and inclusivity to the whole world as the gospel shows and the invitation that Jesus brings. Like what you talk about with empathy, I want to enter into... You also have two, weaponizing pity. I want to give a specific example, and that's really popular now, and how pastors and Christians have kind of bent towards, like what Pastor James was saying, because of their relationship with someone from that community, the LGTB community, that they bend and they compromise truth for the sake of inclusivity. You have a quote in here where it's like the son comes out as whatever gender or whatever they're associating with. And they say, would you rather have a dead son or let me be or alive and choose how I want to express myself? Right. I want you to, can you talk about that and break that down? Because it really takes a really relevant example of what we're dealing with right now. But you have so much in this book that addresses that very same thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. So yeah, would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter is the language that the gender cult, the LGBT gender cult, will catechize its prey. So people that it's preying upon. So when they're trying to convince, you're going through puberty and you feel kind of awkward in your body, it's because you're actually in the wrong body. You're trans, and you need to be able to do it. And if anybody tries to resist, if your parents say no, you're not, then they train, right? Would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? If you don't let me as a boy become a girl, if you don't put me on the hormone blockers, if you don't do this, then it's basically a hostage situation. The kid's threatening, or the doctors and the doctors, in quotes, or the counselors or whoever will come and they'll say it to the parents. Like, I know that this is uncomfortable for you, but would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? And they're appealing to the pity and natural affection of a parent for a child to say, if you don't affirm this, then your kid might kill himself. And do you really want that on your conscience? Do you really want to lose them forever through suicide? Because you wouldn't use their preferred name and allow them to dress the way they wanted or use the pronouns. And it's just it's like it's the end game of that kind of manipulation. And as opposed to going that, like, one of the things that the empathy can't do is it can't distinguish between a person's distress and harm to that person. Right. So, like, there's a way in which, like, no, I know that if I refuse to go along with this lie that you're believing, you'll be distressed, you'll be hurt, you'll be offended, but you won't be harmed. It's actually, I'm doing surgery right now. I'm trying to, like, take out a cancerous tumor that you've absorbed. But it's not harming you. And so we empathy will often prioritize short-term pain relief rather than long-term good. So I'm not going to say, I'll just kind of put that off. I won't address it. I will seek to relieve the immediate pain, whatever it takes to make the pain go away right now, even if that means leaving the cancer in or leaving the poison in or whatever. I will do that, as opposed to the harder thing, which is to say, no, I'm going to stay anchored to the shore, and I'm actually going to try to help you. And the hard thing for a lot of Christians is, because we can't save people, it's like all we can do is, like, remain anchored to the side and, like, hold out the hand. But if they decide, I'm not gonna, there's really nothing we can do.
It's so hard.
And it's hard because we so want them to be saved. We so want them to be delivered from whatever addictions or whatever sins or whatever things that they're enslaved to, that we can go, well, maybe if I just let go of the side this one time and jump in there with them, then that will help. And it's like, it can't. No. Like, the only source of hope and help you have is Christ.
The truth sets you free.
And I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact, because they live their life not really realizing how much they depend on Christ. And He is the tree. He is the outside force. It reminds me of a story. I lived in St. Joe, Michigan, which is the southwest part of Michigan, and there's a river called St. Joe River that flows into Lake Michigan, and we were right on, the city's right there at the lake. And there's a story that has constantly come back to mind. A guy and his girlfriend and another couple were walking to the end of the pier, and they were goofing around, and the girlfriend fell into the water. And the currents are in the river, they're often so powerful, there's no way you can get out of it, even if you're a great swimmer. And the girl fell in and she didn't come up. The boyfriend jumped in to get her, and he didn't come up. And the other guy was going to jump in to try to, and someone grabbed him and said, there's no way you'll come up. That it's hard to see them go down, but if you don't have an anchor or something you're holding, that current's going to, and I think we often think, well, I don't need to hold on to the tree because I know God. I know who He is, and my knowledge of Christ, not my connection to Christ, is what's keeping me saved. It's my knowledge. And we go back to the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. It's my knowledge that saves me, not my connection that saves me from those things. And we think we can just freely jump in and somehow have Christ's superpower to be able to hold ourselves in place. Like I can hold myself and be the savior. And that's the problem, is that we often think we're the savior and we're really not.
Yeah.
We're just connecting them to the savior.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that if you're going to reach out in empathy, you got to be connected to the savior to really have any influence to save people.
So June last year, June, we had about 8 people reach out for this month. I don't know what it was. I told them, I'm like, maybe I should be the gender studies pastor or something, because this ministry was working. I don't know what's going on, but there was favor that last month it was like 7 or 8 people reached out from that community. So something must have been going on social media or stirring the pot where God was working on their hearts. In a month of pride, showcasing who they are, God was doing work on people's hearts. So I talked to 7 or 8 people, and it was funny because it was happening so often that I just gave the same response, so I didn't waste my time with the rest of the conversation. And when we would talk, they would all the time, they'd be like, well, I was hurt by this person, or these people said this about me, but gossiping is a sin and all these things are a sin, so they should just mind their own business, or the word homosexual, or it had been changed to like later, and that actually didn't exist in scripture. So before we got into any of those rabbit holes, because they're going to believe what they want to believe, I just started asking them, because I was like, we got to cut straight to the point. If God himself came down from heaven, held you by the hands, there was no room for doubt that this was not okay, and he did not want you to be participating in this, would that change your mind? And some would say, well, he's not deserving of my worship. Have a nice day. God bless you.
Right.
Thank you for your time. If they said, well, and then there was only 2 of those people said, well, I guess I'd have to change. And I'm like, okay. So then I would walk them down, showing them why it's wrong. And 2, it was actually crazy. 1 left his boyfriend he had been married to and living with, and we talked about flesh versus spirit, and so all these things he had never heard about. And he goes, honestly, there's times where I'm like, I just honestly feel disgusted and I hate myself and I wonder, why am I doing these things? But no one had ever spoke truth and love to him to help him out. And then there was another lady who ended up breaking up with her girlfriend, giving her life to Christ. So 2 people, but the rest, it took a couple people for me to figure that out, where God's like, you didn't even cut to the point because you're wasting time here. But that's the ultimate issue, because God was telling me, he was like, Alex, you don't save people. Your persuasion doesn't save people. And oftentimes I can think that if I give the right argument or a right amount of knowledge, that they'll turn. It's not like we talk about this all the time. It's not an ignorance issue. It's an arrogance issue. And I think people that put the flag up on the wall, or they compromise and they try to reach those people, that's not the issue. It's their heart, and they don't want God. They want an errand boy.
I mean, it's called pride.
It is called pride for a reason. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Very good.
So is there anything, I know we've bounced around a lot. I was looking through some of my quotes that I had from you. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to, as we kind of wrap up the podcast, a point that we've kind of missed?
Yeah, maybe the last thing to say is, and if you write a book called The Sin of Empathy, and it's largely devoted to dismantling this counterfeit and this manipulative blackmailing form, it's good to probably end on but compassion is still actually good.
Yeah, true.
And,
that's good.
And so what does that actually look like? And so one of the things that I've over the years as a pastor, in working on this issue specifically, was like, okay, so what would a truly biblical compassionate response look like? What does it look like to stay tethered to the shore? And so I came up with these kind of 4 statements that basically are in my head when I'm pastoring someone who's in a hard spot. So there's suffering going on. You got something where compassion is warranted. What does it look like? And this is true. I wrote them in such a way that I would use these even if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I've been abused by so and so." And at that moment, I want to go. I want to take what they say seriously, but I don't have the right to simply believe it wholesale, because I haven't heard both sides. I haven't looked in, you don't know if people are just making false accusations.
Yeah.
So, but what was in that moment when I still don't know the full story? What could I say that would be true, and how should I operate? So the first thing is, this is hard. It's an objective statement about reality, that it's just like whatever, accusations or whatever's going on, this is objectively hard.
Mm-hmm.
Second statement is, I know you feel that way. So this is acknowledging their felt reality, but it's not necessarily affirming it, because there's work to be done to determine is how much of what they're feeling is according to truth and how much isn't.
Yeah.
So this is hard. I know you feel that way. I'm with you in this. That's the third statement. I'm with you. And that's compassion. That's to suffer with someone, to be with them is different than to like dive all the way in them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you in this. And then the fourth is, I have hope.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the tether.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily say
good.
those like verbally, but like I'm trying in whatever I do say to communicate those four things.
Yeah.
This is hard. I know you feel that way. I'm with you in this, and I have hope. Because the I have hope is when you're faced with Job's wife, who's raging against God because some of great tragedy, and she's blaming him and she's hurt. And I go, I can be with you in this, but I just you can't see hope. Like you don't see it right now. It's too dark for you, but I see it. And I am going to bring that if I'm with you, I'm bringing that with me.
Yeah.
I'm not leaving that in order to identify with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so those four statements, I think, are a really good just framework for actual biblical compassion.
Yeah, I really like that flow. I know Pastor James is writing them down right now. I'll have to steal his notes to remember that. It's a good framework to. I like how you said acknowledge, because I think a lot of times people misassociate Christians for being calloused, and I do see that from the opposing side, because there's this balance where it's like there's one side where they're just totally, because the pendulum swung hard the other way. So there is no empathy, there is no compassion or tethered at anything. It's just basically apathy, facts over feelings, whatever. You acknowledge where they're at, but you lead them to hope. That's what I like. Because it's not just, because it is understanding where they're coming from. And when I talk to people of that community, I recognize, hey, this is tough. And you might have been ostracized or not approving of what you're doing, but I want to get down to their level in order to bring them up out of it, but I'm still tethered. I really like that framework. Is there anything, first I want to get through, because I've told my friends about this. I've been sharing this book like crazy with my friends, and they're like, hey, let me read that after you. I'm like, you got to go buy it. I want to tell my friends online that you've been watching the podcast now. One, I'd encourage you, why don't you share this with a friend right now? Start the conversation, not because you're being subliminal or taking shots, but I think it's a good conversation that, especially if you're a Christian, to be able to be equipped and have the right words to kind of understand what's going on in our culture. So one, share this with a friend. Two, you should purchase the book. Where can they find the book, Dr. Joe?
Yeah, so you can either if you want to get it on Amazon, it's there, or if you get it straight from the publisher, sinofempathy.com.
Mm-hmm. And I'll have that linked in the description to make sure that you can get a hold of that. As well, if you want to subscribe to, you want to give the plug for that?
Yeah, so the publisher is Canon Press, and we actually have a subscription service. Think of it as a kind of combo of Audible and Netflix. It's kind of family-friendly subscription service to equip your family. And so it's got everything from the good meals, so content on raising your family, and Christian content, lots of theology, different things like that. But also shows for the kids, like older cartoons that aren't going to have all of the ideology trying to manipulate them. You can trust it; it's curated. As well as you got podcasts, you got documentaries. You got it's just a whole host of content. And if you use the code, so it's go to canonplus.com. And if you use Joe99, they gave me my own little thing. You get the first month 99 cents. You can actually, if you don't want to buy the book yet, you can just do Joe99 and you can listen to the book for free. Once you subscribe, you get all the content. So you can listen to that book and all my other books that way, and try it for a month and see if you like it. But it's I would say, as a preventative measure for families and churches to try to shore up biblical foundation. It's just a great like vitamin to have as a part of your family culture. So canonplus.com.
Yeah.
Joe 99.
Yeah, it's been a privilege to have you with us today. We sure appreciate you taking the time to speak into the lives of those that are listening. I hope it's been a blessing to them as it has with us and talking about all of these things.
Yeah, so in short, it's speaking the truth unapologetically, not cringing or leaning away, but it's being able to confront, but not being callous, just tethered to reality and to hope, which is Jesus. So, and we need that in our culture right now. So we pray this blessed you. Remember, share this with a friend, subscribe, so you can get a hold of that book or just purchase it. And I'll have all of that in the description below. And make sure that you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. So anytime we post content, you will not miss it. You'll get a notification to your phone. God bless you guys. We love you. And we will see you next week for another episode of Experience the Truth.